Hi there, and welcome to this session on creating adaptive learning easily with Storyline. I'm John, and by the end of this session, we're going to be taking you through how to create a really short refresher course that's adaptive using a pre-test. Now, a couple of things to go through beforehand. You can do this on any version of Storyline. In this instance, I've used Storyline 360, but you can use 1, 2, 3, 360. The principles will stay the same. Also, another thing to highlight, creating content is quite a personal thing. You're going to see how I create content, the triggers that I use, the variables that I use, but the fact is that this is just one way of creating this refresher. So please, I just want you to take these principles, take them forward, and I hope it's a big helping hand. With that said, let's get started.
So here's our starting position. Now I've used a template from Faster Course that I've tweaked for this, and I just think they're really nice, simple and easy to use templates. So with regard to this course, we have got a front screen and we've got 3 slides of learning, and we're going to want to make sure that when we get our questions wrong relating to this, that it shows the relevant content. So let's start off with the story size, and in this case I'm using 1000 by 600 to give it a full widescreen view, and that's something that I use quite regularly. I'm going to be incorporating quite a minimalistic player on this, so I am not incorporating a menu, a resources, a glossary, a volume, or any of those kind of tabs, so it's going to be really quite clean. And also I have, as a standard, I changed the browser settings to resize browser fill screen and also scale player to fill browser window. So that means when we publish our content, it is taking up the full screen. So it's given us a maximum size. So just to kind of give you the story view, there we have our opening slide. We have our 3 slides of learning, and those are going to be used in order to be adaptive. So that's our starting point, and now to add some elements into it to really make this work.
Okay, so let's give a little bit of clarity as to what we want to do here. We want to make sure that when we have an answer selected correctly on our quiz, that it will miss out that corresponding learning slide. So as with a refresher, you're not wanting to be refreshed on the stuff that you already know about. So that's why we're doing this adaptively. So we're going to use triggers and variables in order to make this happen so that when you get the correct answer, it will skip that learning. It might sound a little bit complex at the moment, but we're going to go through this step by step.
So we're going to be putting our 3 questions straight after our opening slide here. For these questions, we're going to be using the new slide freeform question option because it's really nice and simple, and we want to make this as streamlined as possible. Now, for adaptive learning in this kind of context, you can use any kind of freeform question, and also in the future you can choose any kind of question type that you like. Within this case, we're just going to use the pick one because I just want to give you really the intro to this, and then you can go away and play and discover new possibilities with it. So here we're starting off with our blank slide, and we're going to work with that by adding in some shapes to use as buttons. Now you can use regular buttons, but just for me personally, I prefer using shapes. It's a personal taste, but you'll see how it works. Here I've created our first button from a rectangle shape, just calling it correct answer just for ease of reference at this point, and I'm copy pasting so then it creates our 3 options. This is just going to be for visual representation purposes. Obviously on a real life course you're going to be going into far more design detail, but this is really about looking at the inner workings of this and just getting to terms with them. We're wanting to make this quite a streamlined look to this whole process and wanting to get people to really use the screen. So within this case, we are going to change the submit interaction of the pick one option, and we're going to change that from being when you click on a submit button. So instead of you selecting an option and then selecting a submit button, With this process that we're going to be putting in place, you will literally select an option and that will trigger the submit interaction. We're changing this therefore from being submit interaction pick one when user selects the submit button to when user clicks what is rectangle 1 that is also shown here as correct answer on screen. We're going to copy that trigger by using the option above it, and as a shortcut we select both of our incorrect answers that we're wanting to assign this submit interaction trigger, and we're going to paste that on. Next, we need to make sure that we are showing what is going to be the correct answer with regard to our form view so that Articulate actually knows what is the correct answer. So we're putting in our options and we're selecting which one's the correct one. So we have our new triggers, and we're also going to want to make sure that we remove the submit button to save any confusion and also just keep that clean player look. So we're going to go into our options in the cog and remove submit, and also we're going to change when revisiting to reset to initial state so that if somebody comes back to this, then it won't be on the incorrect or correct layers when they come back to it. So we're going to implement those. Finally, to confirm, so we've got our correct answer is set at rectangle 1, which is our green box that we've highlighted, and now we're going to give it a try. There are 3 options. We select correct, and it brings up the correct layer, and let's give that another go, and let's use one of the incorrect ones, and brings up the incorrect layer. So that works perfect.
So we've got our first question in place, and like I said, we've used the pick one option to really give the foundation for this, but you can use any type of freeform question, or in the future, any kind of question that you actually create. What we're going to do is we're really giving you the building blocks to this by using those correct, incorrect layers. But in the future, you could simply have it when somebody selects an answer that then it pushes through with the variables that we're talking about. It's all about those building blocks. So we have one question in place now. We're going to create the other 2, and we're going to have those 3 questions. So let's go to it.
Fast forward a little bit, and I've now put in 2 more of the pick 1 option answers. I have also moved where the correct answer is, so as you can see in the form view, we're all set up now to have it so that if somebody gets a answer correct, then this will tell Storyline to miss the relevant learning slide that we have. So we are going to say if you get question 1 correct, then miss out the first slide of learning, which we've got shown here as 1.5. In order to make this happen, we are going to incorporate some variables. And so in order to do this, we will create our variables, start off with using our variables option tab. This is a really handy tool if you ever want to see how many variables you have on a course, where they're actually being incorporated and how they're being incorporated, how many times it's going to be shown, and it's just a really useful tool. So keep this in mind for future courses. But start off with, we are going to add a new variable. We are going to title this first variable Q1, and we're going to be incorporating true false variables for this because we're going to use it almost like a switch. So we're going to have Q1 is a true false variable, and we're going to have it set to default value of false. Next, we are going to copy and paste this, and we're going to create Q2 and Q3 because these are going to use the same type of variable. So they're going to be using true false, and they're going to be both set at default value false. So it just means that it is a quicker system of creating variables that you know that are exactly the same. For our first question, therefore, we are going to go to our correct layer, and we are going to add our first variable trigger. We put in for our trigger that we are adjusting the variable Q1 for question 1, and we are going to change that value of the variable to true when the timeline starts on the correct layer. So somebody gets this question correct, that will change the variable to true, And as we progress through our examples, this true variable will then tell Storyline to miss out the relevant learning. Next, we're going to implement the same for question 2, but obviously we are going to be putting in place for variable Q2 for question 2, and next we're going to be doing question number 3, and we're going to be adjusting Q3 variable when timeline starts on that correct layer to become true. So Q1, Q2, and Q3 are on their relevant correct layers for the relevant questions. And you can see that we have just one instance of each of those variables, and also you can see where it's being used.
So we've got our 3 questions in play, but now we want to tell Storyline to actually move on from the learning if we get that corresponding question correctly. And you're going to hear me talking about this conversation with Storyline because it really is that. You are telling it what to do, how to do it. And so what we want to now do is we want to take those building blocks of we have our questions and we want to put in place the actual actions in order to tell it to move forward. So let's get started with that.
Now we have our triggers and our variables in place on our question slides. Now we need to tell Storyline when to skip on our learning slides when that variable is shown as true. To do this, we need to go to our learning slide and we need to add a trigger to tell it when to actually move. So when it starts and the trigger is shown as true, move to the next slide. So trigger wizard, jump to slide, next slide when timeline starts. And then we need to show conditions because we need to add in our variable elements. In this instance, for the first learning screen, we are adding the trigger condition for Q1, and we're saying if Q1 equals true. We now want to add this trigger for our second and third learning screens in order to make sure that Q2 for the second learning screen and Q3 are in place to make sure that if they are shown as true, then that information can be skipped. So we have our triggers in place on our learning slides to tell them to move forward when the variable is equal and true. And also we have our trigger on our correct layers on our questions in order to make that switch to true. So let's give it a go. Start out and we have our welcome screen. And for this, we have question number 1. So question number 1, we are getting correct, and that will not show the information. Question number 2, we have gone incorrect. So we want to be able to show that learning slide. And question number 3, we're also getting incorrect, and we're going to be able to see that learning. So let's go through to it. And there we go. Area 1, so question 1 has worked correctly, and learning slide number 1 has been skipped. And 2 and 3 are now showing. So that's our first version and our most basic version of this. So now we're going to add some elements onto this to make it a bit more fluid and a bit more effective.
Okay, cool, that works now, but it's pretty rough around the edges. Now, for the purposes of this session, I'm just keeping it a very basic style, but obviously if you were presenting this as a finished product, it would be way cleaner, way tidier. And let's give it a little bit of a tidy, but also think about what happens if somebody wants to redo this refresher. So they've gone through and they want to redo it. Let's look into that.
In order to do this, I have implemented here a final slide. So just really nice and easy with a retry button. And when we click on that retry button, we're wanting it to take us back to what is the first question that we have, that pick 1 right there. Now, what we want to do is when somebody comes to this final slide, we want it to reset all of those variables for the Q1, the Q2, and the Q3, and we want it to reset those to false, because when we are at false and it goes through, that will reset the amount of learning screens that we have. So instead of us having to apply these to individual screens, we simply put it when timeline starts, and it'll take care of resetting those variables so that they can be used over and over again when we want to redo our refresher. So it's just a really simple, easy way. So we've set Q1 to false when timer starts. Timer starts Q2, and we're using the copy and paste trigger function here on Storyline to really make this as simple and easy as possible. So those are all in. When we also hit retry, we want to tell Storyline to go to 1.2. So all we have to do is add in the trigger there. So we're going to tell it to action, jump to slide, 1.2 when user clicks that rectangle, which is our button. Okay, so let's give that a little go. Okay, so we are having number 1 as incorrect, so it'll show that content. Number 2, we're doing as correct, so we'll hide that. And then on number 3, we're doing that as correct. So we should only have, there we are, area number 1, so as it's been informed, and then it goes straight through to that end slide. And then we retry, and yep, it brings us back to number 1. And thankfully, because the slides are actually set to reset to initial state, we're not getting our correct incorrect layer popping up when we get back to it.
Now we can retake the quiz, and that's working pretty smoothly, but it's still pretty rough around the edges. And we're also quite abrupt with the end of our questions into our learning. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in place a bridge slide just to kind of tidy this up and to make it a bit smoother.
Really easily, we're going to tidy this up. So we're putting in this slide, so it's a really basic slide, and we've got our button there for continue, which will take us to 1.6, which is our first learning slide. So really nice and easy, we have put in the slide, and all it's going to do is it's going to be that bridge, because it's quite harsh, that movement from questions straight into content. So we've got our front screen as per usual, and then we're saying we're having number 1 correct, so we're not going to see that content. Question number 2, once again we're going to do is correct, so we're not going to see that. Question number 3 we're going to have as incorrect, and that will then mean that we should just see the learning screen for number 3. So we've got our bridge slide, and now we hit continue, and there we go, straight into content for number 3. So it just provides a really smooth transition as opposed to that harsh transfer from questions through to content. And also that means that you can fill in that content page on the bridge slide with whatever you really want, so the advice that you require.
Okay, we've got our bridge slide in play now, but what happens if somebody gets all the answers correct? It'd look a bit strange if you got all of them correct. It said we're going to look at your particular learning and then go to the end. So we're going to factor this in, and we're going to create a particular slide to show when all the answers are correct. Now, this is just one way that you could do this. You could, as a progression of this, put in place another layer within your bridge slide if somebody got 100%. But for the purposes of this, we're going to take this really nice and easy, and we're going to push it out to another slide.
If somebody gets all of our questions correct, then we're going to want to provide them with their own particular slide. And in this case, we've done 1.10, and we said if you get all the answers to these correct, then you'll get this congratulations. What we want to do is when they click on that view all content button, we want it to go to our first slide of learning, which is 1.6. So what we're going to do on this is we're going to create a layer. and it's going to be called Move On. And what happens is when you click on that View All Content button, it's going to come to the Move On layer, and this Move On layer is going to reset our variables and also move us on to 1.6. So let's have a look at this. We've got our resetting our variable to initial state, which is something that I always do to my variables, our layers, in order to make sure that when we come back to them that it is reset and we don't get stuck in a loop. Also, on this layer, we want to make sure that our variables for Q1, Q2, and Q3 are set to false from this. We want to make sure that it's getting reset. So, set Q1 to equal false. We're using our copy and paste trigger function there to make it really easy. Q2, we're going to have that as false. And then finally, we're going to be doing Q3. Next, we want to make sure that when we actually go onto this move on layer, that this actually moves us on to 1.6, which is our first slide of learning. So jump to slide 1.6, which is that first layer of learning. But we want to do this when the timeline reaches a very, very short period of time after when timeline starts. So we're doing this as 0.01 of a second. So in a blink of an eye, it's going to move through. The reason for doing this is so that it definitely engages those false triggers for the variables, and then it doesn't overcomplicate. So it definitely makes sure that that happens. Next, we want to make sure that the actual button that we have goes to our layer. So it's not just there for show. So show layer, move on when user clicks. There we go. So we're saying go to the move on. When we're on move on layer, that will change our variables and also will move us through to 1.6. Now we actually need to make sure that we tell Storyline that once all 3 questions are answered correctly, to go to this slide that we've created for 1.10. So let's put that in place. We're going through to our last question here, because in order to have actually engaged this and done this properly, you will have had to gotten all other questions correctly. And we're really using that variable Q1, Q2, Q3 in order to engage this. So we're saying on our final correct layer on question number 3 that jump to this 1.10 congratulations slide when we have Q1 as true, Q2 as true, and Q3 as true. So when we click that continue button, then pushes through. Now what we need to make sure is that this is actually positioned correctly in terms of our actual triggers. So we need to make sure that this new command is above the jump to next slide so that it actually runs through those triggers and make sure that it actually engages it.
Okay, so we have got our bridge slide, our learning, our triggers, our variables. We have got our congratulations slide. We've got everything in place and we're making sure that it works. So let's give it one full try then.
So all of our triggers are in place, our variables, our congratulations slides, and now we're just going to go through and we're just going to make sure that everything is working together. So we have our opening slide, we click on start, we're going to get our first question correct, there we go, correct layer. Next one, question number 2, correct answer, correct layer, and then finally on this question number 3, there we go, correct, and that will push us through to our congratulations. So because we've got our variables in place saying that if all of these are correct, then go through to that congratulations. View all content has reset our variables to false, so it's now showing all of our learning slides. So we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and that's all of it. And now it goes through to you finish your refresher. So it's working just the way we wanted it, and that's how easy it is.
So that's it. That is how to make adaptive learning quickly, easily, with articulate storyline. I hope that's been a helping hand. As I said in the beginning, this is a very personal way of creating this. This is my style. Your style might differ, and it'd be really interesting to see how you tweak that and how you really make it your own. But I hope this has given you the building blocks in order to advance with that. I would love to know any comments that you have on this. If it's helped you out, I would really love to know. But that aside, hope that's been a big helping hand.